So one of the biggest reveals in the Year 10 cinematic was seeing Nighthaven and Rainbow operatives working together once again. And although there has been some quotes and statements over the past few years hinting at a potential return and sort of rebuilding some bridges, we've still not necessarily gotten a blatant reason as to why Nighthaven have decided to work with Rainbow once more. So in this video, I want to look at the facts of Nighthaven once again reintegrating with Rainbow and sort of looking at the true meaning behind this for them, as there could potentially be some ulterior motives. Not saying they're necessarily bad motives, but at the end of the day, they are still a private company, and as what Smoke said to Sledge, this is still business. And Nighthaven are still mercenaries. Now, one of the agents of Nighthaven, who seemed to be one of the key members in sort of building back this relationship with Rainbow, seemed to actually be Osa, a veteran Nighthaven agent who's been there since the start, and even Callie, Nighthaven's leader, attributes a lot of Nighthaven's success to Osa. Now, of course, over the past many years, you have had little snippets in the Battle Pass lore of operators reaching out to each other, such as IQ asking if Vigil is okay after the tower attack. If you don't know, Thermite's mental health in the lore since the whole Deimos situation started has been dwindling every season, and one of his good friends, Arini, reached out to talk to him and go for a coffee and just make sure he's okay. So although there always has been these sort of snippets of these relationships between characters seeping through the cracks, they didn't really seem to be core reasons as to why Nighthaven would join back. I mean, just because Arini and Thermite are friends and Thermite's going through a rough time, it doesn't mean that these multi-million-dollar contracts between a private military and a NATO-based organization like Rainbow is going to happen. There has to be a lot more in it for both sides. But Osa would seemingly begin to start some traction, especially after the attack in Seoul, where Tower is located. She would sort of be like, well, maybe we should reach out to Rainbow. We've not heard from them in a while, just see how they're doing, especially after what's been going on. But again, these were just statements and sort of goodwill gestures. But a big turning point seemed to happen when Skopos, whose real name is Kure Galanos, was integrated back into Rainbow after originally serving under Daniel Bogart and alongside Gerald Morris, who would become Deimos, with the aftermath of that fallout placing her in a wheelchair and using this major shift in her life to go back to school, which would eventually give her the opportunity to create the Pantheon Shell robots. But here's the thing, although she is the grand architect of it and was the one who had the vision of how they would be operated and controlled and designed, they were actually physically built by Osa, with Osa meeting Kure for the first time at a Defense Hardware Summit, where she saw Kure presenting an early version of these robots. Osa and Kure would seemingly bond well over this, and Osa would help her create the version of Talos and Colossus we know today, allowing Kure to take these robots to Rainbow with her, despite some other Nighthaven agents sort of questioning why she would allow this. And we'd actually get a little note of Osa talking to Skopos saying, "Stay in touch, Kure, and leave Callie to me. The sooner Rainbow and Nighthaven see eye to eye, the better for us all." And of course, this would seemingly work. Osa would convince Callie to work with Rainbow once again, but I still feel like there is more to this which we don't necessarily see yet. But I think potentially we may be getting a glimpse at some of the reasons why this is also benefiting Nighthaven. And remember, they did say that they'll only get involved when the reward outweighs the risk. And I don't believe that Nighthaven are doing anything shady or evil. I don't think there's like a plan for them to dismantle Rainbow. That's the Keres Legion's motive. And although Nighthaven was technically initially dragged into the whole Keres Legion conflict because of the Keres Legion stealing their ordnance and sort of framing them in the eyes of Rainbow, Rainbow told them to stay out of it and that they would handle it. And for the most part, that kind of seemed like that was all the Keres Legion were doing to Nighthaven. They kind of just stole their stuff, more so to affect Rainbow than to affect Nighthaven themselves. And Nighthaven obliged. They stayed out of Rainbow's way, and Rainbow and the Keres Legion have been having this conflict ever since Deimos unveiled himself to Harry. And it seems like the Keres Legion never done anything to Nighthaven after this. Like I said, them stealing Nighthaven's ordnance wasn't even to necessarily affect Nighthaven, it was just to throw Rainbow off. But now in the lore, we are starting to see an aspect of the Keres Legion which we haven't seen yet, and that is more of the background workings of the Keres Legion, the sort of moving of ordnance, the creation of these bombs, where they're getting their money and supplies from, and of course that company known as Polaris. We still don't necessarily know who they are. I think that they're a front company for the Keres Legion, but I don't necessarily have any any proof of that, it's just a little bit of a theory. But now we're starting to see some of the cogs in this big machine of the Keres Legion. This is potentially where it may start to be treading on Nighthaven's territory. Remember, Nighthaven are a private military. They're mercenaries. They also have a QCR department led by Osa, which creates an insane amount of tech. A lot of their money come from contracts. We're now starting to see some other organizations like Polaris popping up alongside the Keres Legion, not knowing who owns this stuff, not knowing who creates this stuff. This could be seemingly stepping on Nighthaven's turf, where they're getting to a point where aligning themselves more with Rainbow and working together against the Keres Legion is benefiting both sides. You've got Rainbow and the Keres Legion's conflict, which is delving into systematic issues, changes, politicians, potentially corrupt politicians, government control, corruption. This is focusing on a lot of heavy-hitting things. Money isn't a major factor when it comes to Rainbow and the Keres Legion. That's not what they're fighting for. But Nighthaven, the private company, they care about money. They are a business at the end of the day. So companies like Polaris, who maybe operated under the Keres Legion, doing these ordnance deals, transporting ordnance, selling ordnance, maybe in the black market and stuff like that, being their own mercenaries under these subdivisions. How many of them we don't even know. Well, then they're starting to step on the toes of Nighthaven. They're starting to murky the water around Nighthaven's operations, especially with Nighthaven being a legal entity where these ones potentially wouldn't be. They could cause a lot of issues around Nighthaven's entire existence. For all we know, Polaris or another company in the background could be on the level of operation of Nighthaven, and that's why I think Nighthaven have decided that it's better to align themselves with Rainbow. That's why Osa said it's better to align themselves with Rainbow. Once they all see eye to eye, it benefits both of them. And although they have different motives, Rainbow exists to protect those who cannot protect themselves. They aren't there for a profit, whereas Nighthaven is there to make a profit. They are there to run a business, but they'd also be there to snuff out competition, whether that is legal or illegal, and if they're affecting them. And although that may have been one of the original reasons that sort of drove them apart was the difference in how they operate, it may also be one of the reasons which bring them together again. Rainbow have clearly stated that they are fond of Nighthaven's expertise. They are impressed by Nighthaven. They think they are a valuable asset, but it was due to a lot of infighting and personal grudges that caused them to break apart. Our operators can put that to the side and remember what they're fighting for. Realize how beneficial both sides are working in unison, even if they aren't going to be the best of friends. Just like what Grim said, they're mercenaries. Just like what Smoke said, it's business. But it's good business. It's business that benefits both of them. But Rainbow do have the threat of the Keres Legion trying to dismantle them, and Nighthaven probably have a lot of issues with all these dark companies in the background. I genuinely cannot imagine that everything that the Keres Legion is doing doesn't have any effect on Nighthaven. Nighthaven 100% have something to gain from taking down the Keres Legion, just the same as Rainbow does. Although those motives are different, it will pay off for both of them. So yes, I am very glad that Rainbow and Nighthaven are working together again. It's clear that this should have been the path all along. It's clear that this was always going to be the best case scenario for both sides, and I'm excited to see how this is going to work out. Of course, we technically have already had our first glimpse of this with the dual front mode. We can see that you can play as both Nighthaven and Rainbow operatives now due to this reintegration of both sides. So seeing them actually canonically working together again is really cool, and I cannot wait for them to expand on more character dynamics. I want to see more Thermite and Aruni. I want to see Nook and Grim. I think there's a lot of stuff left unturned there, and I think there's a lot of stuff worth explaining, and due to their prior conflict, you could have a really interesting dynamic here. I don't know about you, but I always love the character trope of two enemies begrudgingly becoming allies, and I think Nook and Grim would be a really interesting duo. But yeah, I believe the true reason why Nighthaven and Rainbow are working together again isn't just for the simple reason of it benefits both of them. I truly do believe that the Keres Legion's operations are having a background effect on the private sector with this black market they are potentially having with Polaris and all other aspects which we've most likely not even seen yet. It's definitely stepping on Nighthaven's territory, and getting rid of them would be beneficial for Nighthaven, and of course we know how beneficial it would be for Rainbow for them to work with Nighthaven once again. And I think the sort of character relations they've been setting up over the past few years and the stuff with Osa is just to give a bit of humanity and realism to that reintegration as well. There's a lot of really interesting stuff that can come from this, so if you want to keep up with Rainbow Six lore, then be sure to drop a like on this video if you did enjoy. Subscribe if you're new. Shall catch you on the next video. I love you all. Stay safe. Have a good one.